I have lived long enough to know that storms do not merely pass. They leave a taste on the air and a memory in the ground. When the clouds break and the land exhales, some men go back to their chores as if the sky were a door that shuts clean. Not so. The earth remembers the hoofprints, the broken branches, the scent of lightning on rock. I have been taught to read those traces as one reads a prayer, from the small marks to the large meaning. That is how I understood what happened on the night when Micah Hale, a poor cattleman with too much horizon and not enough cattle, lifted two of our daughters from the wet dirt and carried them into his cabin. You wish to know the shape of the story and the beating heart of it? Listen, I am called Nantan Greymouth now, for my hair and for my habit of speaking, where silence might have kept me safer. I have witnessed the rise and fall of camps, the parley with governors, and the way the sun still refuses to bargain. My work in younger days was to keep the old laws in my head and to make them sing in the hearts of the people. These laws are made of bone and breath, not paper. They grew from the ground as we did, and on that night the laws bent, but they did not break, and a new thing was woven in. The rancher's name, as I have said, was Micah Hale. He was not rich in cattle, nor in neighbors, nor in luck. He had an honest back and a cabin that looked smaller whenever the wind leaned on it. He owned 14 miles of loneliness to the nearest fence post and 40 to the nearest town. The men in that town knew of him only as a pair of shoulders that sometimes bought salt and coffee. They did not know his story, and for a long time neither did we. He had the look of a man who carried debt inside his ribs, something he owed, and something he feared would come due when the light failed. When the storm drifted off the hills like a herd moving to higher grass, Micah went out to count his stock and found two shapes in the churned mud beside the fence. One was groaning low, the sound of a big animal that refuses to fall. The other lay quiet, with the kind of silence that makes men whisper their mothers' names. These were women of our people, but not of the ordinary kind. I do not say giant, as the whites do, to mean a monster from a child's cautionary tale. I say it, as we mean it, women made large by the generosity of their mothers' bones and their own hard work. They had the breadth of shoulders that carries water over a long ridge without spilling, and the length of limb that makes a spear feel like a flute. The younger of the two, though she was the taller, was called Tassa Rock Above Water. I knew her since she was a child, who could climb cottonwoods faster than boys who bragged about their speed. She had stood taller than women of her age since she could walk, and when she laughed, the sound jumped like a river trout. The older sister, though she was a hand shorter, was Lanai's summer shadow, not so quick to smile as Tassa and more thoughtful, with eyes that measured before they leapt. Their mother had come from a line of women chosen to carry the clan forward. Their father was our chief, Kohana Two Horns, whose word could calm young warriors like a hand on a horse's neck. These sisters were not ornaments of the lodge. They were trained in the work of protection riding, tracking, deciding. When they entered a meeting, the air rearranged itself to make room. On that night, Tassa's blood had found the ground. It gathered in a dark flower beneath her ribs, where something sharp had gone in and come out again, whether a branch or a blade. No one knew at first. Lanai wore a head wound above one eye, the kind that makes the world ring like iron for hours. Still, even wounded. They were not small. Micah stood above them, and the storm's last ragged light threw long, strange shadows that made his yard look like a tribe gathering to witness something important. Help our people, and you court the anger of settlers who see us as a problem that needs solving. Turn away, and the land keeps quiet, but your spirit makes a noise you cannot stop hearing. Micah did not know all our laws then, but he knew this argument inside himself. He had watched too many of his calves, nose at udders that had gone dry. He had buried a sister of his own in a winter that took more than its share. When the taller woman's eyes opened Tassa's eyes, black and steady like pond water under moonlight, she did not plead. She looked at him with the bare truth of a creature that respects strength and expects decision. Sister, she said in our language, or so Lanai told me later. Her voice was deep enough to live in. That was all. And Micah, who had heard the word sister years ago when death took his own, stooped down without another thought, slipped his arms beneath Tassa's shoulders, and found out what it means to lift a life that is heavier than cattle and more precious than anything he had ever carried. It is not easy to bend a woman like Tassa. Even unconscious, a body like that has a will. Micah nearly buckled. Lanai, swaying and bleeding, took Tassa's legs. They moved together like strangers crossing a river in darkness, finding each other's weight with their feet. The cabin door was narrow, as men often are when they build alone, and Tassa's shoulders were wider than a good doorway should be. They turned her sideways, with a care that made time itself step lightly. And when they laid her on the pallet near the hearth, the rancher's hands shook with the awareness of what he had done. Invited death if judgment fell wrong. Invited life if mercy rose first. Out on the ridge, 5 riders drew themselves up against the last bruise of the storm. They were ours. War paint sharp as hawks' eyes, rifles crossing their backs like the long bones of wings. They had been hunting the trail of blood and broken grass, and the trail led to the poor house of a man who did not have enough shutters to keep out the wind, much less trouble. They will test you, Lanai told Micah in slow, careful English, her words the stone she placed between 2 shores to make a crossing. They do not speak to you to start a war. They speak to see if you are a man who tells himself the truth. The riders did not descend at once. Our warriors know that fear shapes men into different kinds of animals if you rush them. They watched. They let night finish its work. But white law in that time did not like to wait. 3 men with badges came from the opposite side, their horses wearing the cocksure look of animals that think their riders always know the trail. The leader introduced himself later, but that night he barked first and named himself after. He was Deputy Marshal Rowan Pike, a man who believed the land was an empty room. He had the right to search whenever he wished. Perhaps he was not born a cruel man. Law and the desert can peel kindness from a person like sun from a snake. Step out, Hale, Pike said, using the voice of men who are used to watching others flinch. Micah stepped out, because he had the sense to know a door can become a trap if you cling to it. His porch wore blood. The deputy's eyes liked that. It proved something to him that needed no proofing. You harbor hostiles, Pike said. He always used the word hostile when he meant human with other ways. Micah's first lie shrugged and died on his tongue. He had never been a good liar. "I'm helping the wounded," he said, "as I would help a mule with a broken leg, as I would help a boy sleeping in the snow." Pike's mouth made a straight line that looked like a fence that cut a pasture in two. "That answer won't save you," he said. "You stand between me and my work." He drew his pistol. It did not make him taller. It was then that Lanai did a brave thing. She opened the door and stepped into the lamplight, and the night made room for her because it could not do otherwise. She wore the blood of her sister like paint. Her hair was braided for battle. Her gaze was the kind that separates the quick from the fool. "I am Lanai Summer Shadow," she said in English. "My sister is Toss a Rock Above Water." This man saved her life. She did not shout. She did not beg. She spoke like someone who had learned early that most of the world's doors open better to dignity than to noise. Deputy Pike raised his rifle, because a man who has only one answer will use it in every conversation. "Our law," he said, "doesn't bend to heathen customs." He spat the word the way a boy spits a seed. He did not think of where it might grow. Before the deputy could order his men to rush the door, one of our riders called from the dark, "Wait." The call was a single syllable in our tongue that can mean many things. Hold your breath, shut your eyes, count your heart. The 5 riders came forward then, hooves soft in the churned earth, and their leader lowered his scarf. I knew him bare with maple voice, a man whose speech tasted sweet, but whose choices were made as carefully as a winter fire. He had been sent ahead by our chief, Kohana Two Horns, to find his daughters, and to weigh the man who might have kept them alive against the men who wished them dead. Micah's hands shook as he gripped his rifle. He had 12 rounds for the long gun, 6 for the short, against 5 of ours and 3 with badges, and against the night itself, which never takes a side except the side of what island he could have chosen to close the door. He could have chosen to run. He chose instead to speak the truth he had been holding like a hot stone. "My name is Micah Hale," he called. 3 months passed. I found a girl by the river, our side of the cottonwoods, half drowned and burning with fever. I gave her food and medicine, wrapped her in my coat, and led her to the trail that would take her people to her. I did not ask her name. I did not leave mine. If that earns me a debt or a noose, I will not lie about it now. Silence is not empty. It is a bowl that holds the next thing said. The horses stood still. The deputy's jaw went tight. Bear with maple voice looked past Micah into the door where Tassa lay breathing the slope between life and death. Then he spoke, not to the lawman, but to the land, as if it too needed to hear. The chief's youngest, Suri of the Light Hands, was found by a man of no name, he said. She called him Riverman. She told her father that if ever she made the years he hoped for her, she owed them to a stranger with the eyes of a tired hawk. The rider looked at Micah and nodded once. "We will wait for Kohana Two Horns at sunrise," he said, "and let the debt speak for itself." Deputy Pike did not like the word wait. Men who ride with papers in their pockets often grow to hate that word. He snarled. But even he had heard of the treaty our people and the territorial governor had signed after the last season of iron. It was not perfect work. No paper ever is. But it said in its stiff language that when matters touched the body and honor of our people, the old laws would be considered and, where possible, honored. Pike ground his boot heel into the mud as if he could step on the memory of that treaty. Until sunrise, he said, because he had too few men to say otherwise. But when the sun is up, I'll take what's mine. Let me tell you what a night like that feels like. Every creak of wood becomes an omen. Every whisper of coyote on the slopes becomes a messenger with teeth. The lamplight breathes and dims and brightens as if the cabin itself is trying to warn you. Inside, Micah and Lanai pressed cloth to Tassa's wound, changed bandages, checked breath. Lanai's hands were learned in the old ways, poultice and small stitches, a bowl of boiled roots for pain. Micah's hands did not know those things, but they knew stubbornness and the weight of a body you are not ready to see die. He worked. He forgot to be afraid, which is the honest way to be brave. Listen, the old laws are not hammers. They are woven things, made of many strands, some older than memory, some braided in last winter's snow. One such strand is the blood debt. If you carry a life back from the edge, your name, if spoken, becomes a rope around the wrists of those who would spill it. Another strand is adoption, drawing a person into the circle as kin so that he is protected not only by treaty but by love, which is the only agreement the wind respects. When the ridge brightened like a coal reluctantly accepting its fire, Kohana Two Horns came. He did not come with a war party because he was not courting a story that would end in widows. He came with 5 elders whose faces wore the paint of decision, which is not the same as the paint of war. I walked with them, old bones wrapped in a blanket, because Kohana had asked me in the night to stand at his shoulder and remember, in case the morning tried to make us forget. Deputy Pike stepped out from behind the crate he had turned into a barricade. He kept his rifle at the ready, the way a nervous man keeps a hand on his knife at a wedding. Kohana slid from his horse, as if the ground had waited for him, a tall, spare man with eyes that kept accounts the way a river keeps stones. He knew every face in the yard before we had finished tying our mounts. "You hold my daughters," Kohana said. His English is smooth as river-worn rock when he chooses to use it. He did not raise his voice. "This creates trouble where there could be respect. They are wanted for questioning in the killings at the Morrison place," Pike said, and he made the word questioning sound like a knife that hasn't yet decided where to press. "Harboring them is a federal crime. The rancher is under my authority." Kohana glanced at Micah as if weighing a horse by the way it breathes, and then at Tassa, who had roused enough to sit, her great frame wrapped like a boulder in a blanket. "Morrison," Kohana said mildly, "tried to force himself upon Tassa, and the field knows it. She defended her honor, and the honor of women is law before law. Your treaty nods its heavy head at our customs in such matters." He let that settle. Then he did a thing that made the morning stop every sound for 3 heartbeats. He took from his saddlebag a necklace made of bone and silver, carved with the story of his mother's clan. Long lines, small spirals, a hawk's small eye that seemed to watch the wearer. 3 months passed, he said. A man with no name pulled my youngest from the river, gave her food, gave her coat, gave her road back to us, and asked nothing. He stands there. He pointed with his chin at Micah Hale. He has now pulled a second life back from the edge. The debt is no longer a single rope. It is a net. If I pay it wrong, it will tangle around the feet of our children. Pike's patience was the thin kind that breaks if you breathe on it. Spare me your poetry, he said. The law talks with bullets when men hide behind ceremonies. Kohana smiled the way the desert smiles when a man underestimates it. Then hear it plain, he said. I adopt Micah Hale. I make him kinsman by deed to my house. He becomes my son by the braid of bone and honor. He lifted the necklace. It gleamed dull and serious in the sunrise. Treaty says you honor family law where it is not madness. And this, he held the necklace higher, is not madness. It is the fabric that lets us live. I stepped forward then, because it was my place, as a keeper of songs, to make the sound of law in the air. Adoption binds the adopted to duties and protections the same as if born. I said, speaking both in our tongue and in the English, Pike could not pretend not to understand. Who harms the adopted harms the family. Who protects the adopted protects the peace. The elders behind me murmured their assent, the sound like stones rubbing under water. Pike's rifle trembled not with fear, but with the rage of a man who sees a door closing on a room he meant to search. You can't make American land into Indian land with a charm and a chant, he said. Kohana did not blink. The paper your governor signed last winter, he said, was not a charm. It was the hard agreement of men who had counted too many dead. If you dishonor it now, you will not have enough ink in your city to write the explanations. He turned to Micah. Micah Hale, he said, with the voice we use to name a child. Do you accept to be taken into my house, to stand with us, to answer when we call you brother, to be son to me, in the way that keeps storms from taking you? Micah looked at Lanai. He looked at Tassa. He looked down at his hands, which were nicked with small cuts from fence wire and wood. Then he did the simplest and bravest thing a man can do. He said, I accept, and his voice did not break. Kohana placed the necklace around Micah's neck, and the air felt different, as if someone had adjusted a tent pole and made the shelter stronger. Pike swore low, as men do when they realize they have been outflanked, not by trickery, but by a kind of sense they do not possess. You make a mockery of the law, he said. This isn't finished. He holstered his rifle. Angry men sometimes need both hands to gather their anger and spat near his boot to remind himself of his contempt. There will be questions in the capital. Let them send men who know how to listen, Kohana said, not unkindly. We will give them coffee and answers. You may think this was the end of the story. Adoption is a closing of a circle, and the circle is strong. But circles can become cages if they are not drawn with care. Even in wisdom, a chief can tie a knot too tight if his hands remember different winters than the one he stands in. Micah wore the necklace. He wore the new name that went with it, Riverman, which the young ones gave him when they saw the silver hawk on bone and remembered the story of Suri. And in the months that followed, his poor ranch became Wayfork Trading Post, a place where our people and the settlers exchanged goods and words without pretense. The giant sisters worked there, as if they had always meant to. Tassa, with her reach and her laugh, moved timbers as if they were stubborn boys and made walls rise in half the time. Lanai handled the counting and the bargaining. She had a mind that could feel the weight of a bag of flour by looking at the way the rope cut into the bearer's shoulder. The world noticed. Men rode from 200 miles to see the strange sight of a white man who wore our family sign and two women who drew respect as soon as they entered a yard. The federal men, who had been so eager to hang Micah, grudgingly brought papers instead, the kind that bless a place by itemizing its taxes. Peace spread, thin at first, like milk, then thicker, and you could taste it. But peace brings a different kind of trouble. Time to hear your own heart. Micah's heart grew complicated in those months. I am an old man. I do not blurt the private matters of love as if they were the names of rivers on a map, but it is part of the truth, and stories that leave out the truth turn sour. Micah learned Tassa's way of standing when she was tired and did not want to show it. He learned the shape of Lanai's thoughts the way they moved before her words did, and his body, which had been a stubborn horse under an unforgiving rider, began to look for one of those women in particular whenever a door opened. It was Tassa his eyes found first and last. He tried to quiet this. Adoption had made the sisters his kin, and our law for kin is not a plaything. The law protects family by keeping hunger from eating the home. A love that eats a home is a bad hunter. The one who saw him clearest was, as often happens, Lanai. She watched him watching Tassa one afternoon while they repaired a broken axle. She had grease on her cheek, like war paint, and a piece of grass in her teeth, like a girl half her age. Adoption shields, she said quietly, in our tongue so the men hauling seed sacks would not hear, and sometimes it fences. We made it to keep him safe. We might have made it too strong. I will not break the law that has set bread in our bowls, Micah said, trying to sound like a man whose mind was made. But truth is a stubborn calf. It pushes against fences until they groan. Lanai only nodded. Then the law must bend for the right reason, she said. Or else we will all start to speak in whispers, and a house of whispers always falls. When the snows had gone back into the mountains, and the prickly pear put out their sly red tongues, Kohana Two-Horns returned to Wayfork with 5 elders again. He dismounted with the same careful grace, but the lines in his face had rearranged themselves slightly, the way a man's lines do when he has solved a problem at night and is not yet sure he will be proud of the solution by noon. Riverman, he said to Micah, using the name as if he had always had it, you have honored the adoption. My people eat because your door opens. My sons have learned, by watching, that treaties do not always need guns at their corners. But I am an old man, and old men often solve one trouble by making another. I made you brother to my daughters to keep the law from hurting you. In so doing, I may have placed another law between you and joy. He looked at Tassa then, and the look was both father and chief. Daughter, he said, speak. Tassa does not waste words. She stood taller than everyone but the morning itself, and she made her voice steady, though I, who know her, heard the current under it. I choose, she said, to say that my heart looks at Micah Hale and does not see a brother. It sees a man who has gathered our people into safety. It sees a man I would share bread and winters with. Our law respects a woman's choosing. Our law also respects kinship. She looked at me then, and I felt her asking me to recall the old songs cleanly. I nodded. Kohana opened his hand as if there were a small bird in it. "The law is not a locked box," he said. "We built doors into it in the beginning, knowing there would come days when the wind needed a way to pass. One such door is called release from kin. It is not used lightly. It is not used to excuse hunger or to dress up a lie. It is used when adoption has done the work it was made to do and must be undone so that love can do the work only love can do." He turned to Lenai. "Older sister," he said, for though she was shorter, she had first right by birth. "Do you hold your brother as brother still, or do you release him to another circle of law?" Lenai stood up straighter, though she hardly needed the inches. "I release Micah Hale from the adoption bond," she said. "He is not less to me for it. He is simply moved to a place where the law will not choke him. I will witness what follows, and I will defend it. Men with badges do not often understand such turns. It makes them think the world is sliding under their boots." But even Deputy Pike, who had ridden back out of spite rather than duty, could feel the portion of rightness in the air. He tried to interrupt with the language of permits and sealings and proper signatures. Kohana lifted a hand, and Pike's words lay down and went to sleep of their own accord. "We will make this binding in both the paper law and the bone law," Kohana said. "We will call the elders and the clerk from the county seat. We will put a mark on a page for those who need the comfort of ink, and we will sing the words that matter in the way that speaks to the fire and the river." That afternoon we did a thing I have not seen before or since. We wove release and union on the same loom. First we spoke the plain words, that unmade adoption solemnly, without jest, and with gratitude for the shelter it had provided. I cut the binding thong of the necklace with a small knife made from the bone of a mule deer I had hunted as a young man. I pressed the hawk-carved token back into Kohana's palm. He closed his hand on it, as if it had heat. Then we sang the joining song, which is older than my grandmother's grandmother, though parts of it have changed like a river changes course and still arrives at the same lake. Tassa wore a dress heavy with beads that told stories of her mother's line. Her hair carried small hawk feathers that her father had saved from a spring when hawks were foolish and easy to approach. Micah stood straight as a new fence post after rain. He did not look conquered. He looked, how do I say this without making a poem out of a man? He looked relieved, as a traveler relieved is not the same as one who is merely tired. It is the relief of someone who takes off a pack at last and finds that his spine is still trustworthy. The clerk from the county seat came late, riding a horse that was embarrassed by its rider. He asked in his pinched voice whether there would be a fee and what was the proper spelling of the names. He wanted to file the union under some category that did not yet exist. He asked whether Wayfork Trading Post was now a church, because things that aren't stores or jails confuse his kind. Kohana suggested, "Extraordinary circumstances duly witnessed," and the clerk scribbled, "Because men who live by paper will write anything you say if you say it with a chief's voice. The federal investigation you might expect never truly arrived. Oh, some letters were sent with titles and stamps. Some men in coats too warm for our sun rode out, squinted at the horizon, and decided The law had been satisfied in its most essential hunger, which is the desire to believe itself just. And the trading post continued. It grew like a child, tall in surprising places, clumsy some days, graceful on others. We sold coffee and cloth, and took in pelts and beadwork and stories that cannot be weighed on scales. Men who had fought each other now brought each other tobacco and said each other's names softly. The sound of quarrels still happened, because humans are a kind of animal that likes the feel of its own anger now and then. But the quarrels did not end in funerals as often. And Tassa rock above water. She did not stop being a warrior when she took a husband. She learned to swing a hammer without missing her fingers. She could lift the end of a timber with one hand while Micah adjusted the footing. When white boys came wide-eyed to stare at the tall woman with the deep voice, she bent low enough that they forgot to be afraid, and she told them to fetch her nails. They returned running, as boys will for someone who makes them feel brave and seen. Lanai's summer shadow? She smiled more, which in her case was like watching dawn learn to forgive a mountain. She took a husband later, but that is another story, and not mine to tell without her permission. She remained outrider and adjudicator. Men and women who felt wronged by a trade went to her and came away calmed or chastened, but not humiliated. Humiliation is the rust that eats communities. Lanai refused to use it. What became of Deputy Marshal Rowan Pike? He rode out, made some noise with his superiors, and later made a smaller noise in a different county. Do not think me unkind. He was not a villain born from legend. He was simply a man who trusted more in the weight of iron than in the weight of a promise. He was fitted for a younger world than the one that was being born on our hills. As for Kahana Two Horns, age softened none of his bone. He grew funnier as he grew older, which is a type of warrior's courage most men never master. On the day of the joining, he took Micah aside and said, loud enough that even I could hear, "Son, do not call me father while you are courting luck. It gives me blame for your mistakes." Then he laughed the clean laugh of a man satisfied with his own craft and slipped away before anyone could make him speak sentiment to its face. He preferred to address love sideways, as you would a skittish mare. You want the last scene, do you not? The one that makes the story close in your chest, like a hand you would trust? It is not the day of the joining. It is 6 months later, when Wayfork had grown a second room as if sprouting a shoulder. The summer had been generous. The ridgeline wore grass like a good coat. Men of both towns had begun bringing their disputes to our long table, which made me proud, for I had always hoped to see our laws serve more than our own fires. I was sitting on a bench whittling a toy horse for Suri of the light hands, yes, the girl grown taller and more thoughtful than her name suggests, when I looked up and saw Tassa standing on a beam of the new house, steady as the hawk whose feather lived in her braid. Micah stood below with his hands up, ready to guide the weight she would pass down by rope. Their talk was the talk of work, but the pauses between their words said other things. He called up something teasing about her grip. She answered down something true about his impatience. Their words met in the middle, tied a knot, and made a span you could walk on. That, my children, is how a people keeps itself from breaking. Rope tossed up, rope tossed down, weight shared, laughter that knows a person's weaknesses and keeps them anyway. Laws that will bend for love but only the way willow bends, not the way rotten wood snaps. Men who decide to carry what is heavier than their fear, women who choose their own path, and do not let their steps be traded like a bag of flour. Chiefs who remember that ceremony is a form of law, and law a form of ceremony, and both must answer to the sound a heart makes when it knows what is right. I have told you the names as we use them now. Micah Hale Riverman, Tassa Rock Above Water, Lanai Summer, Shadow, Kohana 2, Horns, Bear with Maple Voice, Suri of the Light Hands, Deputy Rowan Pike. Remember them, but do not worship them. They were not gods. They were men and women who did not look away when the storm's last hush revealed two bodies in the mud and a test that would measure everyone. If you find someone on your land who has fallen and still breathes, and if you know that helping will tangle you in laws and frowns and the kind of trouble that stains your porch, ask yourself if you want the land to remember that you closed your door. I am Nantan Greymouth. My teeth are not what they were, but my memory still bites. I have seen peace arrive, wearing awkward boots, stub its toe on our stubbornness, and stay anyway. I have watched a poor rancher step out of his door into history, and I have watched two sisters taller than most men shoulder, a future that required more than the old forms. No one was small in this story, not even the deputy, for he taught us which paths to avoid by walking them for us. When you tell this again, do as I have done. Change none of the bones. Move the flesh where it needs to move so that the story can breathe. Sing the adoption. Sing the release. Sing the joining that satisfied both the law of papers and the law of breath. And when you come to the part where the door opens and a woman as tall as sunrise fills it, lower your voice out of respect, the way you would when entering a lodge. For stories are lodges, and this one has room enough to feed even your grandchildren if you keep the fire tended.